Hello and welcome back to HEMA Fight Breakdowns. Today we're going to be breaking down the gold medal match at SoCal Swordfight for Tier A Longsword between Sam Riles and Jonathan Paulino. These are both people who I know to be very good fencers, and they have a very entertaining fight. Coming into this first exchange, what we see is both fencers come into a right foot forward stance, rather defensively oriented, trying to feel each other out. They move around each other for a little bit, at which point both Sam and John simultaneously attempt to thrust one another. Now, the key thing to pay attention to here is the reason that John gets a slightly better line out of this simultaneous thrust is because of the body position he puts him in. So if you watch carefully, what you'll see is that as the swords are coming forward, Sam is going to duck his head and bend his back leg in order to simultaneously drop his body a little bit and raise his arms upwards with his crossguard. This is an attempt to parry the thrust that he believes is coming at his head. And it works in that by lowering the line of your head and raising the line of your hands, you can help displace a point that is coming towards your face. However, John does a very good job of maintaining his structure. He keeps his shoulders and his wrists and his sword all in one straight line, which means that even though as they come forward, Sam is doing his best to displace that blade upward, he has a long way to travel before it actually reaches there, and the directness that John's line takes means that he manages to get his tip in and to skip off of Sam's mask before his blade is shoved up into the air. If you're ever looking to try to duplicate this kind of thrusting in your own fencing, this is the exact kind of body posture that you want to have. In this next exchange, we see a really cool adaptation from John. Now, in the previous exchange, both fencers came forward with their swords kind of in a point forward style guard, which generally threatens the thrust and is rather defensively oriented. Now, as both fencers here go and come into the center of the ring, John predicts that Sam is going to come forward in a rather similar guard and throws what I would call John's signature move. Now, I'm going to describe it as a variation on a shield how. I know that's not necessarily how John would describe it, but I'm going to describe it that way because it's important to understand the mechanics of why this technique works so well. Now, what John does is he couches his blade on his left shoulder with his thumb on the flat of the blade. Now, this is unusual because John is right-handed, and that means he is sweeping his shield how style cut, or in this case thrust, across his body line from the left to the right. And he does this with the flat side of his blade, which is also a little unusual. But the reason he does this, and the reason it works out so well, is because he can overemphasize the horizontal motion and the travel, not necessarily to deliver a cut and a thrust or a thrust simultaneously as a normal shield how would be done, but to ensure that he is displacing his opponent's blade far to his right side and locking them in an extremely disadvantageous position. Furthermore, from that position, John then winds his point low and down into his opponent's chest in order to ensure that that bind is being maintained. Now, the reason that he came across with the flat side of his blade is because when you cross your body line in such a way, what happens is that your crossguard sits in a vertical position. What this means is that if Sam were to try to leave the bind here and throw a cut quickly towards John's hands or John's head, that vertical crossguard is going to be sitting right in the way of both of those attack vectors, meaning that John can not only push his opponent's blade off into a safe position, he can then wind over the top, and he can deliver his thrust, all without Sam necessarily having a really great place to go with his sword in order to disconnect that bind. All he can really do is go backwards as fast as he can and hope that he can get his sword into a more advantageous position before pushing John offline. In this case, he was unable to do so and gets stabbed in the chest. A really cool exchange and a really great adaptation from John here. For this next exchange, it's now Sam's turn to make a cool adaptation. Knowing from his previous two exchanges that he cannot simply walk into range with his point forward and be defensive, he turns on the aggression and walks into range with a flourish. What this does is it forces someone who's sitting in a defensive posture to essentially wait for you to throw the first attack, which can be a very disadvantageous spot to be in, especially if you follow up this flourish and this forward pressure with a feint, which is exactly what Sam does. He flourishes, he walks into measure, he feints on his left side for a cut, which John fights on and throws a right side cut instead. Now, John, to his credit, realizes very quickly that he has just bitten on a feint and that he is in trouble, at which point he throws a descending kind of Scheitelhalk-style cut to the top of Sam's mask, right as Sam's cut comes in on the upper left opening of John. So, while I can't see from the angle of the camera whether or not both of these really landed with much quality, my assumption is that both landed quite well and that it was a double. But still a very interesting adaptation on the part of Sam, given that he was in a situation where his defensive orientation was not helping him and has now switched gears to a completely offensive orientation. Coming into this fourth exchange and recognizing that this more aggressive style is working a little bit better, Sam comes in with the exact same intentions as the previous exchange. He walks directly into measure and throws a feint. John, seemingly recognizing the pattern, does bite on the feint a little bit, but recognizes far faster that Sam is going to feint to one side and throw a cut to the other. Now, as Sam throws a feinted thrust on his right side and cuts around to his left, John throws up something of a parry on his left side, but then immediately turns it into a SoCal on his right side, meaning that he is attempting to close off the line that Sam is attacking on, while simultaneously delivering a cut to Sam's hands as he closes too close into measure. Now, unfortunately for John, it looks like Sam's aggressive forward pressure put him in a situation where, even though he didn't really bite very hard on the feint, he got put in a situation where his sword had to cross a huge amount of distance in order to make it to the right side of his body, and as a result, it was not able to get there in time to get underneath the cut of Sam, meaning that John's SoCal, instead of coming in underneath of Sam's cut, instead goes over the top of it, hits him in the head, and glances off to the side, while of course Sam's cut, completely unimpeded, lands to its intended target as well, resulting in a double. Despite the fact that it was a double, though, it's a very good showing on both sides of how you can come in aggressive and still know how to defend yourself, while John can show that even though you might bite on a feint, it's never too late to try to bail yourself out. Now, going into this fifth exchange, both fencers come forward with a very point forward and defensive style, much like we saw in the first exchange. Sam, immediately recognizing that John has gone right back to a kind of defensive mindset, continues to throw his probing cuts and to see if he can get John to bite on any more feints. But John, instantly recognizing that Sam is going to throw a feint and then cut to the other side, instead of biting at all, throws an immediate thrust straight towards Sam's face, which seems to glance off of his mask and off onto his right shoulder. Now, at the exact same time as this happens, Sam tries to get his head off of line, which probably saves him some of the impact of that thrust, while continuing to deliver his cut up into the left opening. And I think it's nothing short of a little bit of luck that Sam manages to squeeze that cut in just a bit past the wound out corner of John's defense, resulting in yet another double. As if both fencers can hear me, they both come forward in a new guard that we haven't seen up until now. Sam comes forward in a guard with both of his hands over his head, threatening descending cuts towards John's upper openings. John responds by moving into his own high guard into an ox-style position so that he can protect those openings. But this is probably what Sam wanted to see when going into measure, given that he has essentially tricked John into fencing the way that he wants the exchange to go. As Sam throws a descending cut from above, he morphs it into a feint and then throws an ascending cut from his lower right opening. John bites on this feint and attempts to parry riposte with a thrust, only to find that he is a little bit outside range and that Sam has not quite stepped close enough in order for that thrust to land. They both reset to more neutral positions, and Sam now continues to go for the same kind of feinted and probing cuts that he has seen before, only this time he is not closing the distance in the same way as he has in the past, meaning that every time John tries to throw one of his defended cuts, he is not close enough to land them, and the instance keeps resetting, until John gets frustrated enough with the fact that he is not able to get Sam to close that distance, that he decides to close the distance himself, leaping forward in a thrust of his own, properly lined up with his shoulders. But because of the distance that they were at, he doesn't quite make it all the way to his target, and Sam is able to parry up and off to his right side and throw a responding cut towards John's hands, while simultaneously running backwards. As he delivers this cut, John, recognizing that he has been cut in the hands, throws one more afterblow, which is a SoCal to the hands, which Sam is unable to parry. Now, in some rule sets, this might have been considered something different than a blow after blow style format, but at SoCal Swordfights, they allow one after blow of a tempo after an action, meaning that despite the fact that Sam cut John in the hands, John's SoCal follow-up is still valid and it counts as another double. But it's important to note here that Sam has done a very good job of dictating the pace of the fight by coming forward in the bizarre guard that he had in the beginning. Again, ensuring that John is staying on the defensive and constantly trying to respond to things that Sam is throwing at him, rather than being able to take the initiative and throw cuts of his own. We come now to the final exchange of what has been a very, very fantastic fight, and both fencers are going to have to look very carefully at what they've been doing up until now and what's working up until now. John has remained defensive throughout the entire fight, but it hasn't exactly been working out very well. Sam has been able to use his aggression to dictate the pace of the fight, ensuring that John is always responding in the second intention to everything that Sam throws. Simultaneously, he's been throwing extremely bizarre and weird feints, ensuring that John always has to be at least a little bit wary of a first intention attack. Now, as we come into this final exchange again, we see Sam do something similar, lowering his guard all the way to the level of his leg and watching John match him. The second he sees John go into this low guard, he throws a big, wide, sweeping, overly gestured cut from his lower left all the way to his upper right, ensuring that John has to respond to what is clearly a very big and wide cut. John responds by going into an ox and attempting to wind it out and thrust. However, due to the angle of the camera, I can't exactly see whether or not this works. But what I can say for sure is that this is another instance of Sam dictating the pace of the fight by throwing this weird and wacky cut. After he throws this cut, he throws something what I would consider similar to what John had used on him earlier, pushing down with the flat of his blade in order to create room so that even though the cut didn't quite land where it needed to, Sam was able to wedge his sword over the top of John's ox guard and thrust him in the chest. Again, due to the angle of the camera, I cannot see whether or not this thrust lands. But my assumption here is that as Sam threw his big wide cut, he more or less accidentally and somewhat on purpose ended up pushing his hands directly into the flattened guard of John's ox, meaning that he was able to push John's point down and out of the way into a position where it was unable to stab him. His attack was able to push John's guard into a more advantageous position and get that follow-up. As a result, Sam comes away with a clean thrust that perhaps maybe wasn't so clean if we could see from a better camera angle. It's unfortunate that this fight has to end here, and it ends with Sam winning a control point, which is of course a lot of points under this rule set, and winning the finals match. However, it was a great fight between both people, and we saw a lot of really interesting adaptations. If you're looking to do something like both of these fighters in your own fencing, what I would say is you have to, one, be careful if you come off a little bit too defensive, as you're essentially letting your opponent dictating a pace. John probably would have benefited from throwing some stronger first intention attacks directly at Sam as he walked forward, knowing that Sam was probably going to be trying to feint. At the exact same time, Sam probably would have benefited from trying to bait John a little bit more into throwing those first intention attacks, as he was always getting the better of attacks when he was coming forward with his aggression, but not necessarily coming out very clean. But either way, there's something to learn for everybody here. And if you'd like to see me break down more of these fights, feel free to send me an email over at HEMAfightbreakdowns@gmail.com or like and subscribe and comment. Thanks, and have a good one.